I'll wait a couple more seconds for people to join. Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel discussion on the athlete's dilemma during the Youth for Youth iSummit by LookUp Live and the Social Dilemma. And today's digital age really exudes countless opportunities that are both beneficial and exciting. However, it's critical that measures are implemented to put safety as more of a cornerstone of the digital mission, especially since it seems that the predominant source of material and information that today's society receives is distributed through digital platforms. So today we will dive deep into some of the pressures that athletes face beyond those that just accompany their athletic pursuits in the gym, on the court, or on the field, and really into the digital world. My name is Olivia Lubarsky. I'm so excited to moderate today's discussion, especially given all that we have heard about athletes and mental health over the past few months. It truly seems like our definition of a champion is growing, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. Beyond that, this is an important topic for me personally because of my experiences as a former NCAA Division I gymnast. During my freshman year at Towson University, I struggled with depression that I believe stemmed from an immobilizing fear of failure that accompanied my perfectionistic mindset. As I learned how to overcome depression, I actually utilized my sport as my outlet for all of my internal emotional turmoil, which was very helpful. That is until I suffered a season-ending injury. On the last practice before I was supposed to compete for the very first time in college, I ruptured my Achilles while tumbling in practice. And all of a sudden, this outlet and really what I created to be my own personal solution to depression was taken away from me. Immediately after my physical injury, I noticed a glaring disconnect between the support, treatment, and overall clarity that I received from my physical injury versus from my battles with depression. And that experience inspired the creation of Own Your Roar, which is an initiative within Towson University's athletic department that unites mental health and athletics along to mitigate the disparity in resources through increasing the student athlete support system. And I can give tremendous thanks to social media and other digital tools for Own Your Roar's momentum to raise awareness and truly illustrate the reality of mental health in the realm of collegiate athletics on a national scale. This topic is also incredibly important to our panelists, Baily and Ryan, who are both former very impressive college athletes who will share a little bit about themselves, their backgrounds, and we'll throw in a little icebreaker question to get us started. So Baily and Ryan, alongside your brief intros, my question is, if you could compete in the Olympics for a sport other than the sport you played in college, what would it be and why?
Thanks, Liv. Hi, everyone. I'm Baily Kerr. I'm going to answer the question first, the icebreaker, and then I'll go into my background if that's okay. So shout out, Liv. I think if I had to pick an Olympic sport to go to the Olympics in, would be gymnastics. I think that it is such a beautiful sport just to see bodies being flown in the air like that. And it's so impressive. So I commend you. I'm not saying that I could do it, but if I could, I mean, I would do it. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Well, kind of back to my background and just kind of what I've been through and how I can relate to this overall speaking event. But just like Liv said, I'm super excited and I'm super honored to be able to speak in front of everyone and kind of share my experience and hopefully gain some insights for either younger athletes or just kind of spreading the word a little bit out there on what I've learned myself. So yes, as Liv said, I was an athlete at Towson University, a Division I school where I played field hockey. But before that, in high school and middle school and elementary school, I went through my own mental health struggles. But of course, back then, I was completely unaware of it. But it really shown itself to me when I was in college and really put to the test as far as being a Division I athlete in the limelight, not only just on the field, but also in the virtual world. There's a lot of marketing out there in terms of showing, oh, who won what, who's playing, who's the starter, look at these videos, right? So I think it really showed itself when I was in college, and there are many instances where I was put to the test, and I think that that's where it shows the true champion in yourself. And I think after graduating from Towson with psychology and health science, I was in the mental health field. I worked at inpatient psychiatric units and outpatient psychiatric facilities as well, and kind of really worked with individuals in different populations and then also diagnoses. So with that being said, throughout my experience, not only being an athlete, dealing my own things, but also seeing it in different populations, types of people, and also the athletic world, I decided that mental health and being a champion is more than just our diet, us being physically fit, us being the best athlete out there. It's so much more complex than what we see on the screen. And so I ended up starting my own business, Be Well with Baily. And with this business, I am hoping to help athletes shed some light, kind of like Liv has with Own Your Roar, but more implementing some, I guess, more like not activities, with the programs to help athletes and teams move through this championship mindset in a sense where we're addressing the whole body. This is a work in progress, but I am so excited to share my experience in not only mental health, but also the digital background and how that can impact not only you succeeding as an athlete, but also how you can move forward with your life after athletics.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Baily. Ryan, you want to take it away?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having us. And thank you, you two, for hosting this. And thank you, Baily, for your quick synopsis right there. So my name's Ryan. I'll answer your question first, too. I think for me, the sport I would pick would definitely be surfing. I grew up on a beach. I love the beach, and there's no such thing as a bad day on the beach. So even if my performance sucked, I think I'd be more than content with just being able to be in the water and being out in the water on the beach. So a little bit of background, like of me, similarly to our other two on the screen here. I dealt with mental health issues growing up, and my journey started really early. I lost my dad on 9/11. So I was 7 years old at the time. I turned 8 4 days later. Obviously, being so young, you can't really grasp kind of what went on, the magnitude of it, or how you'd be affected down the line. But I gravitated towards sports really, really early. That was always my outlet. That was the only thing I ever did. And especially when I was growing up, I would hear a lot of adjectives thrown at me because of my performance. You're strong, resilient. And I think the older I got, the more I started to deal with an internal confliction of having the social perception of people tell me this continually, but internally feeling the complete utterly opposite, and not knowing how to speak to it. So I tried to speak through it through sports, and that becomes a really big burden to start carrying around all the time as I start putting my performance on a really high pedestal, because if I'm performing at a high level, then I'm also doing internally well. So my mental health issues were a lot in depression, a lot in anxiety, and they really started to come out when I got to the college level, because at that point, I played Division I baseball. I'd signed with Stony Brook at a high school, and I lasted about 3 months before I had to leave and go to junior college, because when I got to that level, just about everybody was better than me at that point, and I wasn't on the field anymore, and I wasn't playing, and even the guy next to me on the bench was probably better than I was at that point. So I didn't have an outlet anymore, and ended up going to junior college, and then ended up getting back into Division I baseball. But I ended up having to leave and walk away from my sport, which I made that decision consciously about halfway through my senior year season, because I knew that I needed to start prioritizing myself over my athletic performance. And although I don't have any regrets looking back on it, I definitely wish I took the time earlier to address my mental health issues, so I didn't need to get to that point. I'm currently now a third year Ph.D. counseling psychology student. Like Baily, I've worked in pretty different backgrounds before. I've been in inpatient care. I've been in college counseling centers, hospitals, and I'm currently at an inpatient substance unit at a VA out in New Jersey. The reason I love mental health so much and being in those settings is because I feel like I get the opportunity to see the real in people, to see the rawness in people without their mask and their persona. And it's really beautiful when that gets to come out in dialect and in conversation. And I just love those moments and getting to see people for their real selves in a clinical setting. I'm a really big proponent of developing narrative and storytelling. And I think that's, for me, at the core of what psychology is and what treatment should be. And for me, I dealt with a lot of trauma, but I looked at it more as a really needing a really sophisticated narrative of good versus evil and what that's supposed to look like. And I developed a platform called Athletes Humanity because I wanted to develop more humility in being just a human being, not an athlete. And my platform and the website that I have is just athletes simply just telling their story the way they want it to be told, not how they think it should be, not based off the social perceptions or standards that they think they need to live up to being an athlete. And I wanted to kind of just create a community setting based around that. And similar to what we'll get into a little bit later, I didn't want to be the one to drive the demand for it. I didn't want to be the one to dictate where it needed to go, where it needed to be. I wanted the stories and the athletes who were writing their own stories to be able to do that. And I think that kind of covers where I'm at now, except for just sitting and research and writing and reading continually. But
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. So we've got a lot of great content for all of you today. And so Baily and Ryan, I will cut you off just so that if answers get a little bit, I know I like to talk a lot when I get excited, but we do have a lot of great things that we want to talk about today. So the first topic we're going to touch on is kind of the pressure of representation. And competing at the collegiate level is a dream for many youth athletes, as it was for me. Growing up in Los Angeles, California, I frequently attended the college gymnastics competitions at UCLA, and I was just in awe of the joy and all of the exciting energy that filled that arena. And I promised myself that one day the little girl sitting in the wooden stands would compete in college too. And at the start of my junior year of high school, I graciously accepted a verbal commitment to a recruited walk-on position to be on Towson University's gymnastics team. And to say I was thrilled would be a very big understatement. So most recruiting, especially of the very top caliber athletes, occurs at a young age, with some of my former teammates even committing to their teams at universities during their freshman year of high school. And at just 13 or 14 years old, what these young teens are not typically aware of at the time is this commitment to representation and really to committing to being a positive reflection of their university. And sometimes we see star athletes forget that they are playing for something that is bigger than themselves. For gymnasts in particular, although we compete as part of a club gym during elementary, middle, high school, the essence of competition is completely individual. College gymnastics, on the other hand, is the total opposite, where coaches will select the top 6 girls on each event to compete for the team overall. And this transition can definitely add pressure as you are no longer only responsible for yourself. You know, your actions now impact your teammates, the reputation of your team, and your university. So Baily, can you share a little bit about what this transition was like for you? And did this greater responsibility add any stress or extra pressure, especially when you add in the digital components?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Liv. So definitely, I think the one thing that you said that really stands out to me is playing for something bigger than yourself. And as being an athlete in high school, sometimes depending on the skill level with your high school team, it's something where, yes, you are playing for something bigger than yourself, but also you are very focused on yourself and the skill that you present to potentially college coaches. So whether it is you're doing recruitment videos, and I know my recruitment process was a little skewed a little bit, not necessarily, I didn't really have a recruitment process, but kind of how it's portrayed to be as far as, oh, I got to show off my skills, I have to do this. And that's not necessarily playing for something bigger than yourself. It's more your identity, right? Like that identity that you're just playing to get to that division or that top school that you want to go to. And I know certainly for me, it was me getting to that Division I school because that was what I all dreamed and hoped of, right? Kind of like you, Liv, like how you would go to UCLA and sit there on the sidelines. I would go to University of Maryland, sit there on the sidelines and just get chills, right? We have these dreams, we have these aspirations. So finding that transition, that transition getting to actually college, I felt like I had something to live up to from my hometown. And certainly the way I stayed in contact with a lot of people from my hometown was through social media or was through like Snapchat or little things like that. And they'd see that, oh, Baily played or Baily did that, Baily did this. But when I got to college, it really was something where you are you really have to emphasize you are playing for something bigger than yourself, because I will admit my team at Towson, we weren't good. We didn't have a winning we didn't have a winning season the whole time I was there. So I think certainly my first year being there, I certainly saw it. Like, I got playing time, but just because I played good or we played good doesn't mean we didn't get the W. And I know certainly as being an athlete, that's something that's hard, and especially for something that, or someone that's won a lot in high school, or if we've excelled a lot in high school, it's something hard to transition to. And I think certainly that affected me. So I ended up quitting. And that showed that I didn't have that champion mindset. I didn't have that resiliency, because I was more embarrassed. I was more embarrassed that, okay, what my family or my friends from hometown saw out of our record, right? But certainly through social media and kind of just reconnecting with myself after I quit. I quit for a season, or a spring semester, or off season. And I quickly realized that it's a lot bigger than that. It's something that I've worked for my entire life, and it's something that brings me joy in life. And that's so much more important to me than our win score or whatever it is, in terms of the success of our team. It's something that you are working for as a team, not just an individual. And I think certainly, as reflecting, I ended up going back out for the team, and I certainly found the positivity and the growth that I can grow in terms of myself, not only as playing for myself, but also playing for something bigger than myself. It's definitely a transition, and it took me some time, but went through it.
Definitely. So Ryan, I know that the notion of narrative resonates really deeply with you. And digital media and online platforms play a tremendous role in facilitating that process. Can you explain what this process is like for you and how it might relate to assimilating with the identity of your team and your university?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, the process of it is that it is a process and it's a continual process. For me, identity isn't something that's necessarily bedrock. Like, I think for a lot of us, it's we identify with something and then there's a personal account or narrative we give about the thing that we identify with. So, I mean, like for me, when I said I identify as an athlete, well, there's a personal story behind that I'm going to tell myself. And I think for a lot of time, especially with social media and when you get to the collegiate level, especially, even developmentally and psychologically, you're starting to turn yourself outward more and be more aware and keen to your social environment. So now you're kind of grasping onto a lot more things around you and you're identifying with them. But the part that goes missing a lot is however the outcome of those things play out, whether it's your performance on the field, you looking to the person next to you to see what they're doing, your coaches, and even on the online platform. You're identifying with those different things, but what's the story that you're telling yourself in regard to that? How are you personally bringing that into your own subjective experience and narrative view? A lot of times we just use the outcome of it, whether it's, well, that person performed well, so I need to do that thing, or my coach said this about me, so that therefore I am that thing. And we start telling ourselves a personal negative story about ourselves that is causing a lot of internal confliction. So there is a lot of reality that we need to create with us. And what I mean by reality is there's an account, like let's say on social media, of what someone's telling you, or maybe an athlete that resonates with you and you're taking in their information. There's the personal story you're telling yourself, and the reality is somewhere in between there. There always is an essence of needing to integrate it back into something that makes sense for you, not just taking it as whole and then trying to force it into developing yourself and your identity. So even with a team, it's like you're a constituent element of the team, but how are you going to take maybe where you feel limited and find your value? Where are you going to find the value in, okay, I'm really good at this thing. I'm really good at being a teammate in this area. I'm going to expand on that because that's how I can fit into the whole picture of the team, not just using the outcome of the team to determine yourself or your performance to determine yourself, which I know is really hard because I mean, there are no stats for life or living, but when
Mhm.
you're an athlete, you're defining all of your performance based off of that.
Right.
And there's merit in that. So there is that fine line of just indicating that my stats aren't my merit. My merit is the subjective story I'm telling myself about that. And that's malleable and flexible.
Great. So the added pressure of representation may only serve to fuel an athlete's commitment to the always-on culture. And if you haven't heard of that official term, I'm nearly certain that you can imagine how student athletes often fall victim to this phenomenon. And the always-on culture refers to the feeling of needing to be constantly connected or networked, even when an actual need is absent. And while this mindset or setting sounds like it would promote the greatest productivity, the reality is quite divisive. And so with the multitude of social platforms available alongside extra team-related platforms, such as the app Team Builder or Teamworks, the always-on culture demands the digital attention of student athletes. There are also a plethora of health performance apps available that, although they're designed to be an asset to athletes, they often pose significant risks to an athlete's health and well-being, such as through increased anxiety and pressure. For some people, tracking their habits can be a tool to inspire healthy behavior, but for others, it can lead to compulsive behavior that is more harmful. So even though health performance tracking apps are advertised to improve a person's health or an athlete's health, have either of you had any experiences with these potential risks?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially being a female athlete, I think definitely body image and everything can be related to that, especially with having to be strong for not only your personal performance on and off the field, but also that social standard that we see online, right? So we see like these girls are skinny, right? But sometimes when we are an athlete, our bodies just won't look like that, right? And I think that there is certainly, whether it's like a food tracking app or it's a step app, I do know more of an endurance sport like field hockey or lacrosse or soccer, they do have heart rate monitors. And I know there's a lot of pressure behind that to make sure your heart rate is within the right range, right? But I mean, ultimately, it is for a better reason. And I think it's a great opportunity to really identify maybe position-wise how you can formulate your team and what positions you should be at. But I think certainly, just like Ryan just mentioned, like your stats, we're known to be identified, or not necessarily identified, but measure our success by our stats and our numbers. So whether it's our number on the scale, or it's our pant size, or it's the amount of goals you scored, I think kind of going back to what I mentioned before about my overall looking at our success to be a champion in athletics it's so much more complex than that. It's way more than just our stats, our numbers on the scale, our pant size, right? It's something that we have to identify as what our goals are in life and what brings us joy. And sometimes those things, or most times rather, they're not scalable. And I think a lot of these apps and stuff like that do scale numbers, or we do have to measure something, right? But I think that certainly that can cause obsession, especially working on the eating disorders unit and an inpatient psychiatric unit. I think that's something that a lot of people talked about in our groups that we would have is, oh, this app had this and I use this to track this. And it's just something that's so compulsive that they're used to. And it's almost like a blanket they use to comfort themselves.
Absolutely. And it's important to note the high risk of developing digital addiction to these types of apps and other mental illnesses or eating disorders. We can help to combat this by encouraging student athletes to increase their awareness of how much time they are spending on their phones and teach them to perceive their value in what we call the attention economy. Athletes fuel their bodies with the optimal balance of proteins, carbs, and fats to physically perform at the height of their potential. It's important that we create a digital environment that encourages a similar digital nutritional balance. So it seems to flow naturally to transition from talking about the different pressures of representation to talking about the most recent new opportunities for NCAA student athletes to profit off of their own personas, which is something that they have not been allowed to do in the past and something that the three of us did not experience in our own careers. So this opportunity is explained under the term NIL, which stands for name, image, and likeness. And essentially the abbreviation means exactly what it says. College athletes at all divisions and all levels will now have the chance to make money off of their success based on their name, their image, and their likeness. To share a little history on this groundbreaking rule change, the Intercollegiate Athletic Association, which is now known as the NCAA, was founded in 1906 by Teddy Roosevelt as a nonprofit organization to regulate the rules of collegiate athletics in an effort to protect young athletes. And one of the fundamental tenets upon which the NCAA was founded is amateurism. The rules and the approach to amateurism were promoted with the intent to ensure that athletes are students first, thus protecting education as the primary reason for attending a college, hence the term student athlete instead of athlete student. Furthermore, the NCAA prohibited athletes from accepting any outside money to preserve this focus and really secure the concept that college student athletes are not professionals. The NCAA felt that compensation outside of scholarships and stipends was not necessary. But in 2019, California passed the Fair Pay to Play Act, which would, beginning in 2023, make it illegal for California colleges and universities to prohibit student athletes from making money off of their name, image, and likeness. And since then, I believe about 19 states had passed their own state NIL laws before just this year, the latest rule change brings the NCAA's own guidelines up to parallel. So student athletes are now able to market their NIL through a multitude of ways, including autograph and merchandise sales, hosting training lessons or summer camps, sharing sponsored videos on YouTube, and probably what we're going to see is becoming the most common is sponsored social media posts and advertisements. For example, a gymnast could accept a gift from a clothing company in exchange for posting a picture wearing the clothes on their Instagram. Or a basketball player could use their face and name to recruit youth basketball players to an upcoming skills camp. And like professional athletes, college athletes can even hire agents to help them navigate this new NIL world and maximize their opportunity. Now, there's already data that informs how social media negatively impacts mental health, especially for young women with regard to body image issues. Baily, can you share your insight on what you have noticed about the connection between social media and mental health, particularly as a female athlete?
There we go. I'm on mute now. But yeah, kind of just like how I answered the last question, I think really certainly in today's society, everything's online, right? We see whether it's this top one Division I athlete who is jacked, and how do they match up to someone who is skinny on the social media platforms, right? And I think certainly how do you maintain that image of being not only strong and successful in your sport, but also having the body that you want, which certainly I think that gets a little bit miscued, if that's the right word I'm saying, in terms of how we look at our bodies, right? What is our body doing for us when we are comparing ourselves on social media? I think it certainly comes down to understanding we all have our own bodies and all have our own capabilities. And I think that not only is social media can be negative, but I think certainly this is a great opportunity for us to really be in tune to ourselves and learn about ourselves more and do what's best for our body. And I think that it will only make our mental health stronger in that sense.
Great. And I know we typically think when we think of body image on social media, we tend to lean and only think of the female perspective. But Ryan, can you offer some additional insight on your experiences and observations on the relationship between social media and mental health, but as a male athlete?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even statistically, male eating disorders are very understudied. And even if they are approached or studied, most males won't come forward to indicate or divulge that they're dealing with a body image issue in any regard or any type of eating disorder. So, I mean, I think in that domain specifically, it happens a lot more frequently than people would think. I mean, a lot of the social media posts you're going to see, as Baily was mentioning too, even from the male perspective or side of it, is there's this ideal image that males think they need to hold up, and it's kind of that alpha male who's continually spending time in the gym and eating an absurd amount of protein and a really restricted diet until it like becomes compulsive to a degree where it's almost so inflexible that branching off from in any regard causes such disruption to person everyday activity. I mean, I've seen plenty of times people on social media, people I know personally too, who have some type of body dysmorphia as well, and they're male athletes, and they're editing their images, or they won't post a picture because they think they don't look good in it. I've seen this idealized standard that I think if I actually ask people, or males specifically, what they were aiming for, they wouldn't necessarily know, and they're just striving for it. So it's like they're like leading themselves blindly, essentially. But they identify with people they think who have the most followers, who they think are probably gaining the most followers in any way, shape, or form, and they're trying to live up to that standard, and it's just unrealistic for who they are and the reality that they live in.
So you touched on something that I want to get into next, and that's this idea of value and attaining for a certain number of followers and likes. And it seems that an impact, or what we might look at as like a side effect of the new NIL, is that it is providing an increased reason for student athletes to spend even more of their time focused on creating and shaping the quote unquote perfect social media feed, which overall will increase their time spent on these apps in general. And these NIL opportunities that will arise through social media may thereby encourage student athletes to spend more and more of their lives through the lenses of their phone instead of the real world. And I think it's important to be mindful of the criteria to which companies and sponsors are looking at choosing their reps, from where they are determining the quote unquote value of these student athletes. And like Ryan just touched on, I think that we can imagine that typically this quote unquote value will derive from the number of likes, comments, and followers that a student athlete has, as this may indicate their influence on the preferences and consumer decisions of people in their surrounding communities. And so we know that the research supports the idea that increased time on social media will pose a detriment to a person's mental health, as I think all three of us have experienced. So while there is a massive, notably massive cash flow opportunity available, without the proper channels in place to protect against what we already know are maybe some negative costs to mental health around social media use, what expense will this cost overall student athlete mental health?
Yeah, I definitely think that that really increases the pressure even more so on these athletes, not only to perform for their team, for themselves, for what they've worked for their family, for something bigger than themselves, right? Like we talked, but also for this potential to earn money or to be that person who gets someone to sponsor for themselves. So I think that really supports that perfectionist like type of personality, right? And that obsessive thinking that, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this, I have to earn so much. And it really does, I mean, it could potentially boost someone's ego a little bit too, and maybe yes, positively in some accounts, but also I think also negatively. And I think that that's something that will really distinguish between different athletes on the field, and could potentially, I do believe, could potentially hurt a team. I think maybe that'll decipher between, okay, yes, so maybe the more well-known athletes are going to be the ones who are going to get this, but maybe that might cause some tension on the team, right? And I think something that will also kind of take away from actually playing for something bigger than themselves, because it sounds like now, like, not to say that I think that this is a great idea, but I think that there's ways to go about it. And I think certainly understanding the actual NIL and what it's for and what you can do with it. But I think it's something that they lose focus, and I just think that there needs to be some curriculum around it. Like, I do know Boston College just released this curriculum where they hired a company, or they contracted a company to give a course / curriculum to all of the Boston College athletes, to educate them on the NIL, and to also educate them on, okay, what can you do with this after college? Because there is going to be that transition after college. Or what do you do with it before? How do you pick who you choose, right? And how do you implement this into your whole team atmosphere? Because I do believe that that could affect your actual team community sense.
Definitely. And so as we just touched on these colossal cash flow opportunities that NIL engagements may offer, it's important to note how economics and psychology factor into an athlete mindset. And Ryan, I know you have a pretty extensive background knowledge of this subject, but I do want to just be mindful of the time and ask that you try to sum it up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I just wanted to start actually from a study. So as Baily was mentioning, that there is some more education being brought up and integrated within around this topic. But Texas University actually ran a pilot study of financial literacy among student athletes, and they had outcome measures based in 3 domains, which was spending behavior, interest experience, money 101, and test results. And just to summarize, basically, to make it quicker, most of these, if not all of these athletes, had zero curriculum around economics, but essentially zero understanding about what money actually was. And most of their transactions were towards food, which is understandable. I'm always hungry as well. And I think probably most of my transactions would be towards food as well. But they also expressed a want and a need for more of an education around economics. So I probably would start with the first question of what exactly is money? So money is essentially kind of a contract with the future and your present moment. But in modern economics, so in this contemporary time in the economic system that we're within, it's violated. So we have a fiat currency. So fiat currency is essentially central planning, meaning there's a small group of individuals in our economic market who determine what the value of money essentially is. And this is what creates inflation. So this more generally would reverse future orientation and induce the person to take on debt in the present moment and disregard their future planning. And this, therefore, what we would it's indicated as raising your time preference. So there's either raising your time preference or lowering your time preference. You can think of that as immediate gratification or delayed gratification. So if I make money, I'm putting it right back into the economic market. Or if I make money, my delayed gratification would be to save it. This would be similar to you as an athlete being like, I need to practice this amount of days because I want to be better in the long term and consistently, or I'm just gonna screw practice today because I want to do whatever I want to do. So we have money, which is made by an institution that effectively kind of robs us of our future. And the institution compels the demand for the money, and they are violating its supply and enriching it. So this was the same essence as inflation. And what they're doing is exploiting us on behalf of everybody else. And I think, as we were mentioned before, the pitfalls kind of happening that potentially could happen. I think my prediction would be more in the exploitation realm. So a lot of these companies that are coming to student athletes being like, yeah, we'll pay you for your likeness, your name. It's more in the exploitation realm I'm seeing, and not so much of, wow, this company has something to offer me. So that's the big difference between taking advantage of and having something to offer and taking advantage of it in that regard. So if we don't have a secure social contract in the market, then we can't have a foundation for a sound social morality. So it causes people to be more short-term thinking with their money, and their money won't hold value over time. So you can't then essentially plan to create a trusting long-term relationship. So by violating the supply of money, meaning if like this company's going in and throwing you all their money, and that's what the market's dictating they should be doing, it's twisting perceptions essentially. So then we as individuals and as athletes perceive the world economically through prices. And when the perceptual mechanism is twisted, it breaks down your evaluations and your goal orientations and corrodes and breaks down the fabric of not only social morality, but individual morality. So this is when just essentially the fiat currency, money's flowing, everything's going really, really well because I have all this income coming in. It starts skewing your morality, your individual morality, which is also going to skew your reality of how you interact with the market, which essentially is going to be this athlete domain of their name, image, and likeness. So this lowers your time preferences. And so essentially, sorry. So what I was going back to before about lowering one's time preference, this means expanding time horizon. So a greater sphere of concern beyond oneself and made up of space and time. But as you begin to lower your time preference, you begin to see yourself as a tiny piece of the total picture. But at the same time, it's going to generate a pull to want to dig into more of your own experience as a means to give back to the total picture. So if someone was interacting with the economic market properly, let's say in this name, image, and likeness, it's not just about your personal experience, but about expanding the market as a whole for other athletes to do the same thing. You can think of the field kind of growing as a total picture and you're a piece of it, but as you're growing yourself within that market, you're opening up more doors for athletes to come into the market and expand on it. So am I running out of time? I know. I don't want to take up too
I
much
do
time.
want, I saw we have an excellent question pop up in the Q&A. And so I want to encourage anybody in the audience in these last few minutes, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to put them in, as Baily and Ryan would be happy to offer some really great insight. So we have one question, and it's, how can we spread this message throughout colleges to college athletes?
I'll go. Yeah. So, I mean, I think certainly it just, I think in terms of just overall awareness of mental health in the digital world. Okay. Thinking in terms of, I know this is kind of what I wanted to say about like our call to action. So just something that just bringing awareness or mindfulness to it. So thinking, okay, does this social media account bring something to my life? Does it add joy to my life? Does it give me information to my life? Is this something that is helpful for me in the future? Kind of like Brian was just talking about, are we investing to the future, or are we taking away our time from the present moment? So I think certainly there's no like, not necessarily like strict guidelines on what we should be following, what we should be doing, because we all have access to social media, and I'll be caught on social media for hours and like, what am I doing? It's just something that happens. Not to say it was good for me, but I'm taking that information from that experience. Oh, I wasted an hour of my time on that when I could have been doing this. That's new information. I'm not going to be hard on myself for this. I'm not going to become obsessive. I'm just going to be mindful and move forward for the next time, so I can actually put in something for my future to better myself.
Great. I think that I personally agree with what you mentioned about the value of increasing education. I think a lot of times our frustrations or upset or conflicts about things of really across all topics do sometimes stem from a lack of understanding of the topic. And I know specifically around mental health issues, it's so much it's so much more helpful to creating an environment where student athletes feel comfortable expressing themselves when you overall lay out the education component so that everyone's understanding. And I think even for me personally, in my experiences, I convinced myself that my battles with depression were an excuse for why I wasn't performing well. And that was just absolutely not the case. And it really took, months of reading the science behind mental illness to understand that depression is not something you make up. So I think you make a really good point about pushing this message out to college athletes through increasing our education around it. So Ryan, any closing thoughts for us?
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I'm gonna just read what I wrote to you before, because I don't know if I want to change it. But so I think using online platforms to help establish your own personal niche. So it should be a place where you can express your values, your personality, and also a place where you can have them reflected back to you in an environment of others doing the same thing. So you want a platform and you want your social media platform to have boundaries, but it needs to be filled with other market actors, to tie into the idea of money, who have something to offer, something to take advantage of as a means to not further ingrain those boundaries that you might be putting down, but to incrementally push them and to push them in a direction towards a way that you've established growth. So there's a lot of value in understanding who you are, but there's just as much value in understanding who you want to be. And I know as athletes, we're always told that limitations are probably the worst thing we ever want to hear. We're limited in this regard. I can't do this, I can't do that. But there's a ton of value, especially in economics, and understanding where the limits are. So when you start understanding where your limitations are, well, that's when you start understanding exactly who the people, the assets, the stories you want to bring into your environment and to help stimulate your growth. So there is a lot of value in limitations. You need them in order to understand where you're going to know where you are, but you also need to understand what's hindering you and getting in your way. And that way you can start reaching out towards, who do I need to bring into my environment to help bolster my own personal development and growth, and how are they also simultaneously doing the same thing? So we talked about education on college campus. It's right there, right off the bat's a limitation. And okay, now who do I need to bring in to start stimulating that even further? And how am I limited in that regard? Sometimes I never wanted to look at what I didn't know, but I've started to recognize I know so much more, but I don't know. And there's a ton of value in that. And it helped me stimulate me in a direction that I wanted to go in. It's more about stimulate. I always thought about, for me personally, happiness is a necessary byproduct of my curiosity. using your happiness as a marker that you're in the right direction. But when it becomes the overall goal, you start to ebb and flow with your environment, your field, your performance, and it's not as stable as a niche or foundation to stand on.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you both. I want to start by thanking Baily and Ryan for sharing such insightful and enriching perspectives. And thank you to our audience. We're so happy to have you. I think we are just out of time. So I encourage all of you to attend all of the other great sessions that the summit has lined up for today and tomorrow. And we thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.